Welcome to this Python introduction class, and today I'll get started by simply creating a Python file, and I'll be using Jupyter Notebook because at the end of the day I hope to get us to the level of data analysis and data science, and this Jupyter Notebook is perfect IDE for that. Okay, so now that our IDE is open, we are going to start by understanding what Python is. Okay, so most times you've heard about Python. Python is a programming language, and it's a high-level programming language, very beginner-friendly, and popular in the 21st century. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most popular programming languages in the world. So we'll be looking into what we can use Python for beyond just data analysis, like I talked about, and data science to be more precise, machine learning and AI. Python can also be used for the creation of web applications, server-end applications. Well, for the sake of this class, we'll be focusing more on the basics of Python for today. Okay, from there we'll now move over to getting our state of pointer with Python for data analysis and Python for data science. All right, so now that we know that Python is a programming language, the first thing you should do is to install Python in your system. So for beginners, you just have to go to Google and type Python download. Okay, that's how we normally start. Then you can click on this to download the latest version of Python. Okay, so by default it's Python 3.13.7. I'm not downloading this because I already have Python in my system, so I'll be going with the Python version that I have. Then if you don't have Jupyter Notebook, you can go ahead to type anaconda.com to download anaconda.com. As well, I'll be putting the links to all this in the description, both to the Python download file and then the Anaconda file, so we can get them. All right, so now let's proceed. Okay, so there are so many videos on how to install this thing. So basically, just click next, add to parts, then next, install. That's all. So we'll start with basically writing our first command in Python. So to write your first command in Python is basically what print, okay, hello. All right, if I can spell hello correctly, word. All right, so now this is basically our first command and our first program in what Python. Now, since this is Jupyter Notebook, for me to execute, I can easily do what? Click on Run, Cell, and Advance. Okay, so this will basically allow me to execute this cell. All right. So in Jupyter Notebook, the interface is basically we have our title bar, we have the tabs and the other commands. All right. Then this particular shaded area, okay, is made up of cells. Cells are individual spaces, let me use the word spaces, where you can write Python codes. Okay, so they allow us to execute Python codes basically. So each cell is sort of independent from the other but connected. Okay, again, each of these cells are like independent from the other but connected in the sense that a cell that is before, let's say cell 1, before this cell 2. Okay, so whatever is in cell 1 will affect what is in cell 2. So that is the idea. Okay, so let's proceed again. I hope that is clear. So whatever is in cell 1 affects what is in cell 2. So that is the idea. Then we have different kinds of cells. Okay, we have the markdown and the code, then raw. So we mostly run our codes on the code, and then whenever I want to make a comment or leave any particular write-up, we use markdown. Okay, so that is that. Again, print. All right, that is our first command. Hello, my name is G.I.G, as I'm popularly called. Okay, so again, Now I didn't click um, the run button, but if you look to the side, you have shift enter, shift enter. So shift enter is basically what the command, the shortcut. Instead of clicking the plus icon, or the play icon rather, okay, you can always click on what shift enter, and then it will execute your what your code. All right, so that is that. Now when it comes to programming, particularly um, that of high level programming languages, we have some important concepts that we normally like to go through. Okay, and some of those concepts are um, the syntax, which we are looking at. For instance, this is one of the basic syntax. The other ones are data types, data structures, and variables, control flow statements, and classes or objects. Okay, method of programming, like procedural methods of programming, functional way of programming, object oriented method or way of programming. Okay, so all these things we're going to break them down in details. All right, so now that you have seen how to write a basic Python syntax, just a simple word: print, parentheses, um, hello world, okay, parentheses or bracket, okay, hello world. Now this is basically a function. Okay, the print parentheses open and close is a function responsible for displaying whatsoever that is within it. Okay, is a function responsible for what displaying whatsoever that is within it. All right, so that is one. Now since we are using Jupyter Notebook, okay, there is a catch that I want us to also know. I can write something like this, all right, and easily just say shift enter, and it will display it for me. Now this is not a Python syntax. This is a Jupyter Notebook behavior, all right, a Jupyter Notebook behavior, in the sense that Jupyter Notebook has this feature where the last element or the last item in a cell will be displayed. The last item or the last element or the last, basically the last item in a cell will be displayed. Okay, so that is that. Now I can also go ahead and say print 1 plus 2, okay, and then I will execute and I will get 3. Print 1 plus 2, I'll execute and I will get 3. Okay, so up to this junction we've just been doing basic stuffs. Okay, outputting something to the screen, displaying something. We're just writing a command to display something, and we're making use of the print function. All right, so that is that. Then when it comes to Python, okay, there are some important concepts that I want to get out in this beginning video. All right, so one of them is still on the syntax, is the Python indentation. The Python indentation. Okay, so I'll go ahead and change this to Markdown so that you will see how Markdown behaves. So I'll just put 2 or 3 hashtags, okay, and then Python indentation, okay, again shift enter, all right, and then this is what a Markdown will look like. Okay, and I can start talking about Python indentation. Now an indent in most programming languages is just a way of beautifying the language or beautifying our code. Okay, like in C++ or in C# or in Java, these are just ways of beautifying the code. Okay, but in Python is not just a way of beautifying the code, it is part of the built-in structure that makes Python stand out. All right, so I will show you what an indentation looks like. Let's say for instance we have if 5 is greater than 2, okay, colon, enter, and I'm printing. Okay, remember what print does. Print is to output something, okay, to the screen or to the terminal or to the console. Now I have written this command. Notice that when I pressed enter over here, it immediately moved me some spaces inward. Okay, so this is what an indentation means. An indentation defines a code scope or a code block. All right, An indentation defines what? A code scope or a code block. So moving ahead, I'll continue. I can write also print uh, indent. Okay. So now now shift enter. Now both of these are we are printed. Why? Because 5 is greater than 2, that we know. Okay. So let me explain what is going on here briefly again. Over here we are writing a statement, an if statement to be more precise, where we are saying 5, number 5, is it greater than 2? All right, so that is like a question: is 5 greater than 2? And if 5 is greater than 2, which is yes in our case, or true, all right, we are not entering an indentation. What triggered the indentation? In almost every uh, Python program, you would need to add a column whenever we need to indent. Okay, again, in every Python cases, okay, we will need to add a column in order to indent. So there are particular places where these columns are required. You don't just add column anywhere. Okay, there are particular places where these columns are required, and as we go through this course, you will see where those columns are required. All right. So one of the places where you would do such is when you are writing an if statement. Okay, and by default, if you're using an IDE like a Jupyter Notebook or a VS Code or a Spider or any other notebook you feel like you're comfortable using, okay, this indentation will be triggered by default. All right, so that is that. This space is here. Okay, they are what the indent, and Python uses this to identify what code scope or code block, which part of your code belongs to each other. That is what this is trying to find out. Okay, so let's look over or move over to the next one. If 5 again is greater than 2, again that column comes in. You see the indentation comes in again. All right, now I print. We're basically doing the same thing. Yes, but I feel like I want to add my own indentation. Okay, instead of continuing here, I added one indentation. Okay, which is basically one tab. So when it comes to indentation, you're not going to use one tab or what, 4 space bars, one tab or 4 space bars. Okay, so in this case, this is one tab. All right, so I'm now going to print indent again. All right, so this is a wrong way of indenting. Okay, if I execute this, I'm going to get an error saying indentation error, unexpected what indent. So this is a wrong way of indenting. Okay, so when it comes to indentation, we always try to ensure that we have similar indentation in every code scope. Similar indentation in every code scope. What do I mean? If I have an indent with 4 spaces, everything under that particular code scope should have an indent of 4 spaces. If I have an indent of 8 spaces, everything under that scope should have an indent of 8 spaces. Okay, so that is what it's basically saying. All right. So if I execute this now, it works. Okay, why? This is an 8 space indentation. Okay, but when I moved it back like this, they were varying indentations. One was 4, the other one was 8. So it couldn't make sense of what I was trying to do. All right, so it gave me an error. So that is important for you to note. All right, so that is that about indentation. Again, this is very, very important when it comes to Python. This is something that I have seen most times mess students up while learning Python programming. They keep messing up their indentation. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you is how to come out of an indentation. Okay, so let's say if 5, okay, print. Now let's say I don't want to put my indent inside of this. Okay, I don't want to be here. All right, I don't want to be here. Okay, so what I can do is press the enter key again. Okay, so pressing the enter key 2 times takes me out of the indentation. Okay, again pressing the enter key 2 times takes me out of the indentation. All right, so I am not out of the indentation. Then I can unprint. All right, I can unprint out of indent. Okay, so that is that. So these are the things you should know, at least for a beginner, about Python program. All right, so these are the things I believe you should know as a beginner about Python programs. Okay, so I'll move ahead again. Double enter takes you out of the indent. Okay, so that is that. We proceed over to the next thing. Again, I'll add a new um, markdown. This time around, I'll be talking about Python variables. Okay, Python variables. What are Python variables? Well, basically, first of all, let's ask the question: what is a variable? Okay, let's start by saying what is a variable. Okay, a variable is basically a container. That is the simplest way of understanding it. Let's take, for instance, at home, you have a particular cup for drinking water. Okay, that cup takes in what? Water. So the cup is the container, which is also your variable. Okay, the cup is your container and also your what? Variable. So the water is the content and also your what? Value. So a container contains what? A content, while a variable contains a value. All right. So that is the simplest way to explain it. A variable contains what? A value, or a variable is a container for storing or holding values. Okay. Now, just like you would have different variables, or let me put it this way, different cups at home for different liquids. For instance, you have a cup for drinking tea, you have a cup for drinking champagne or any other wine that you feel like drinking. Okay, so the same way you have cups for visitors and cups for basically yourself and your family. The same way there are different types of variables. Okay, and these types of variables are determined, okay, by the data type. Okay, these types of variables again determined by what? The data type. I will show us how to create a variable and basically how to store a value in it. Okay, so to create a variable in Python, you just simply have to come up with a variable name. In our own case, I'm going with var. Okay, var just simply means variable. Okay, I'm the one to decide what I'm going to put. I can choose not to go with var. I can go with number. All right, let's go with number. All right, so equal to, then I can put 5. Right, now the number, or the num, okay, is the variable. The equal sign is like the contains. I was speaking the contains in English. Okay, then the 5 is the value, like the water or the wine. Okay, so now because of this 5 is, all right, an integer, this becomes a, or let's become an integer or a variable, or integer variable. Okay, an integer of what? Or a variable for integers rather. Okay, this becomes an integer variable. Okay, let me just leave it like that for lack of better words. Okay, so now what I just did over there is called commenting. Okay, it's how we leave information for ourselves in a code. So to comment, you basically use your hashtag. Okay, and you type what you want. That's basically a comment. Python will ignore it. Python will not run it. Okay, so let's get back. Now I just created a variable for storing an integer value. Okay, so let me create another one, and this one I'll call it name, and this name would be John. Okay, this name would be John again, and a comment str. Okay, and str stands for string. Okay, so now this name is storing a string value, making it a string variable. All right, so that is that. Now I've been able to create a variable. The first one, number, storing what? 5. The second one, name, storing what? John. Okay, so that's how we create variables in Python. Okay, now these variables, I can go ahead and execute them, and you will see that nothing actually came out. Okay, that's because it doesn't display. This is like when you put water in the cup, or in a feeding bottle, or in a can. The point is, when water is in a container, doesn't display, doesn't show in most cases. Okay, you can only look at it because you know water is there, but practically you can't have access to it unless you're trying to drink it. And that drinking is more like outputting. Okay, when you're putting out the water, basically from the how you added the water. Okay, so in our own case, for us to see what in the variable, we have to what print. Okay, we have to print the variable. All right, that's how we see what's there. You have to print what the variable. Okay, that is the way we see what is there by printing our variables. Now I printed both what 5 John. Okay, so and it's coming from what number and name. So I printed number and I got 5 because 5 was contained or was stored in number. And I printed what name and got John because John was stored in what in name. Or yeah, because John was stored in name. Okay, so that's the idea when it comes to what creating of variables in Python. Okay, creating of variables in Python. Okay. Now, another important thing we should note is how should we store the variable names. Okay, variable names are very, very important. Okay, variable names are very, very important. So let's look at this. Let's look at this. Variable names should be stored in one or two of these ways. Okay, one or two of these ways. The first one is for compound words to be more precise. For compound words to be more precise. Okay, first name. Okay, so I'm going to store John. Now, compound words simply means words that are more than one. Okay, so this is one way of doing it. Let's still go with first name. Okay, first name. This is another way of doing it. Okay, so any of this, and then this is the last. Even though there is one that we can still use. Okay, but these are the recommended way of storing compound words. All right, so the first one is what we know as what camel case. All right, camel case. The one following it, okay, is what we call Pascal's case. Then the one following it is what we call snake case. Okay, so that is that. So these are major things you should know about variables. Okay, now in Python we don't define variables differently and then determining our data types later on. Okay, but basically when we define our variables and assign our values to it, our value will then determine the kind of variables the variables are. Okay, so that is the idea. Okay, so I'll go ahead and execute this again. Nothing came out. It's just basically showing us different ways of storing variables or creating a variable rather. Okay, different ways of creating a variable. Okay, now the next thing we're going to look at is data types. Okay, we've looked at variables and seen to some extent what they look like. So the next thing we're going to look at is data types. So again, mark down. Hope you guys are following. Okay, so mark down, and now in data types we majorly have three main kinds of data types. Okay, and the first one is text. The second one is number, and the third one is Boolean. Okay, text, number, Boolean. These are the major types of data we have, and then the other types that are also important. They're basically called data structures. Okay, like the sequence type, the mapping type, is set type, null type, and the rest of them. I basically call them Booleans. Okay, so That is that. Okay. So we're gonna look at uh, these basic types. Let's see what they are. So I'm going to copy and paste what I prepared ahead of time, and then I'm going to explain it. Okay, so we'll understand basically what I just said. So it's basically what I just said now. Okay, it's basically what I just said now. All right, so these are the other types and what they are, what they look like. So I added none here, but basically just know that none should also be a data structure. Okay, well, as well. Ah, got that. All right, so we've seen how to create variables, we've seen how to do work with them. So let's move ahead to data types and seeing their types of data. So up to now, we've just learned about one particular function. We've learned about strings a little bit. So let's try and understand how these types work. Okay, so um, I'm going to create a text equals to. Now, this is what I call a string. Okay, so this is a string, a Python string. All right, so strings are any object that is enclosed within what? Quotation marks, whether single quotes or double quotes. Okay, whether single quotes or double quotes. Now, our variable names can contain numbers only at the end. Okay, not at the beginning, only at the end. So again, string. Okay, so this is a string, this is a string. The first one is a string with double quotes. The second one is a string with single what? Single quotes. So that is how to create a string. Then number, we already see number. We've already seen number, just basically integer values. Alright, integer values and negative or positive integer values. Okay, negative infinity, positive infinity integer values. Those are what number integer. Those are part of numbers. The other part of number we have is what we call the floats. Okay, the floats. So these are like decimal numbers, decimal values. All right, they're like decimal numbers, decimal values, and it's also both what negative and positive decimal values. Okay, so negative and positive decimal values. All right, so that's basically it. So but how then do you know that this is the right data type? Okay, that is the question. How then do you know that this is the right data type? Well, one of the things you can do is to display them out. So, and here is how. We have a function known as print, and I told you that print is responsible for what? Displaying things to the screen. Now we have another function called type. Okay, type is responsible for determining the kind of data. I'm using the word kind, but it should be type. The type of data that a data or a variable is storing, a variable is holding. So in our own case, I'll go with this. Okay, and then display. All right, so execute to display, basically shift enter. All right, so here we have class string. So in Python, literally everything is what? An object. An object is basically a class or an instance of a class. So since this string is a class, it's an object, so it's basically an instance of the string class. All right, so that's why I'm having class string. So that this tells us that this particular variable, okay, is holding or storing what? A string. Okay, so then the next one, again, type. Right, so notice that the brackets are always equal on both sides. That's something important you should note. Okay, so I'm going to check num2. Okay, num2 is returning class int, okay, which means integer. So it's basically an integer. We only know what integers are. So I'll go ahead to return another one. Okay, so that's class float. So we are going to look at this other two, and let's just say is active. Okay, is active, and I'm going to say true is now. I'm going to say false. Okay, and then finally the other one. Okay, so this like this. Now there's something like I will show us. You can actually print everything we need to print in one line, okay, without having to do all this double. Okay, so I'll put them by separating them with one print statement and separate them with commas. Okay, so you can see their type. Yeah, very important. Python is highly case sensitive. Python is highly case sensitive, and if you type the same name but with difference in cases, Python will see them as different things. Okay, so like when I was trying to type, maybe, let's say I have a name, age. Okay, that's very old person. Okay, and I have another one, age. Okay, um, let's just print. I'm printing. Let's just say I'm printing age. Now I'm going to get an error that says age not defined. Okay, so I'm getting an error that says name not defined, age. Okay, age is not defined, so it's not going to see age as age. Okay, so because of what the differences in character. So bear that in mind. Always ensure that your characters are the same. Okay, so always ensure that characters are the same.